Why don't we start with a quick recap of what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript each do. You might recall this slide from early on. The purple dino danced. The idea here is comparing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, two different parts of grammar where we have nouns, adjectives, and verbs. So we just learned HTML, the nouns, the what, the dinosaur in this case, or in HTML it might be something like the button or the heading, the form. So we're moving on to adjectives, to CSS, which describe those nouns, the purple dinosaur or the purple button, the large button, the small button, the rounded button. CSS allows us to style and manipulate the visual, for the most part, visual representation of our HTML content on the page. But we still have to have that HTML there first, which is why we began with HTML. So CSS, I guess we should get this part out of the way. It stands for Cascading Style Sheets. The style sheets portion, I think, is relatively self-explanatory. We're styling content. Cascading part is something we will come back to once we learn a bit more about CSS. So just to recap what CSS is, it is a language. It's not a programming language necessarily, but it's a language that we can use to just describe the appearance or the visual representation of our documents. And in the next video, I'm going to address this bottom point, that there is a lot to CSS and it might seem intimidating, but it's actually pretty easy to get started with. And as long as you don't have the wrong mindset going into it, it should be a relatively painless process. It's a fun thing to learn in my experience. So whenever we write CSS, we're writing CSS rules. They look something like this. Now, this is a generic sort of extracted version. This is not valid CSS here. This is the basic pattern or template. So we have something called a selector and then curly braces and then property : value : semicolon. So let me make this a bit more real. Here is how we would make all H1 elements on our page, of which there should only be one in the first place. Here's how we make them all purple. H1 and then curly braces, color, purple. So this will make all H1s purple. This formula, this pattern is very simple, but it can get more complicated. We can do two different properties. We can set the width and the height. So width will be 100 pixels and height will be 200 pixels. And we'll talk more about these properties and what pixels are and different units and height and width and color and all of that later on. But for now, this basic pattern: make all image elements 100 pixels wide and 200 pixels tall. Here's a much more complicated one, but it still follows the same pattern. We have a selector up top. This whole thing up top all the way until the curly brace, that is selecting something. What it is selecting is every other text input. So this is saying all inputs where type is set to text, and I want every second one. Don't worry about remembering this or memorizing it for now. What we want to do is give it a 2-pixel solid red border, and it would look something like this. So it's always this same pattern. We select something, all H1s, all images, every other input with a type of text. There's all these different selectors we will continue to learn about. We're not really learning about them yet, so we will learn about them in the next couple of sections. But for now, this pattern is what is most important. Select something and then set these properties, set these styles on those things we just selected. So just to give you a better example of how powerful CSS can be, here's another code pen I found. Did not make this. I am not a talented designer, but it's a pretty nice looking book e-commerce website, I think, or a read books website. There's HTML over here, and here's CSS. I'm going to comment out all of this CSS or delete it, and this is what we're left with. Our content is still here, but everything is huge or tiny in some cases. No nice fonts. Everything looks completely different, but all of the content is here. So all of these images for the books and the authors, all of the text, all of the descriptions, the ratings, all these paragraphs, more images, all the content is here, but I got rid of all of the styles. So HTML, the nouns, CSS, the adjectives, or the structure. Let's give it a second and then see what it looks like. And there we are, back to normal with our CSS. Look at all that stuff. It's a pretty amazing transformation. Same underlying content, CSS plays a crucial role. So we've got a lot to cover, but hopefully it's something you're excited about, or at least can recognize that it's important. And in the next video, I'm going to start by just showing you how many possible properties there are that we can style. There's quite a few.